Hello, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Fidel. In this video, I'd like to go over no self and the experience of no self, and how if we think we know something, we can never find no self. Now, no self is, of course, a concept, and this is always written about in the spiritual teachings. This is the Buddhist principle of anatta, no self. But no self is not something that can be grasped by the mind. Rather, it's an experience. And really, in order to experience no self requires a type of death while we're alive. And what that death is the death of the conceptual self. Now, of course, we don't actually die when we give up our beliefs, because that's really what the death of the conceptual self is. It's the complete emptying of the mind of any concept of who you think you may be. And this is where no self really begins to show itself, because once every single belief is given up of who you are, that's the conceptual death. However, of course, the existence of who you are goes on, because the conceptual death is only made up of thoughts. So even if you give up every idea of who you think you are as a self, you still go on. Now, this is really where the intellect hinders getting to know self, because as long as someone thinks that they know something, then they maintain the conceptual self that's separate from the existence. In other words, one thinks that they are a separate person that knows something. And this is the danger of rational minds, the intellect that thinks that it knows something about this universe. Maintaining that, oh, I'm a separate person that knows something. And that maintains a separate person as an idea, that a person knows a lot, that he's a very smart person, or I am a very smart person. Notice how now the person thinks that he or she is separate from this present moment of existence, because they think that they're smart, that they know something, and that's all a belief, that a person knows something. So only when one gives up all the beliefs that they know something can they then experience no self, because not knowing is the very premise of merging into the present moment, because then the conceptual self is no longer forming the form self separate from an existence. In other words, the self now knows that it gets its intelligence from the very existence itself that it's not separate from. And that's the difference. So the no self is an experience. It's not something that's learned. It's an experience after one gives up the idea of oneself. Then the idea of oneself only stays the idea. You don't lose the thoughts of who you are. So even when you give up the idea of who you are, you still remain. The existence of who you are remains, and this existence is not separate from any other existence. And that's no self. Now, the interesting thing is where do we learn no self from? And this is where the belief, if one is going to believe in anything, this is where all the spiritual teachings point to. This is where we need to go. And I'm not recommending anyone goes here, but this is what the Tao points to, and all the other teachings 2,500 years ago point to, is that when the mind is quiet, then we can learn from directly within us, from our heart. Because Source speaks from our heart, and Source is the universe itself that we're not separate from, speaking through us. So whether we know it or not, every single person is, in one way or another, getting their information from the universe, because no one's separate from the universe. But to drink directly from Source is to listen to this inner voice that we have, our inner teacher. In fact, even the Buddha points to it, and he says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that means when the mind is ready to listen to the heart, then one can find the teacher, which is the very universe itself that we're not separate from. And once one knows that they're getting their information from source, which is from the heart, not from the mind, from the heart, then one learns that one was never a separate self, that one was always not separate from this present moment of existence. So in summary, the intellect and the no-self don't go together, because if one thinks that they know something, then they maintain the conceptual self that thinks that they know something. I as a self know something. I as a human know something. I as a person know something. I as an individual know something. And that creates the separation between the self and the whole existence, because now you think that you're a person. But when you give up the idea or a belief that you're a separate person, which is learned from within ourselves, this is not something we study in books. That's why you could learn all about no self and you'll come up with ideas. Your mind will just collect more information about what a no self may be. But the no self is the very giving up of all ideas of what self is, and finding out from within ourselves that we, meaning, of course, now when I say we, that's going to form in your mind humanity, but we, humanity, every person in this planet, we're never separate from this present moment of existence, that this present moment of existence is the very identity of all. This is the one consciousness. And this cannot be known because, again, it points to the Tao. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And we can't know what this present moment is because we are all part of this present moment. Just like the eyeball cannot see itself, the self cannot know itself because it is not separate from this present moment. And any attempt at detecting itself, either through a thought observation or trying to name it in some way, or looking at oneself in a mirror, there is no way to know of the non-dual state. And even the knowledge of the non-dual state itself becomes a part of the non-dual state. And this is why it can't be done, because even if I think about who I am, that very thought becomes a part of the existence, but can never define the existence. Like a dog that's chasing his own tail, that's the thinking mind, chasing around, trying to figure out. The dog's trying to figure out in thought who he is, or who he or she is, and keeps chasing around over and over again, but the whole time not seeing that they are already that which they're trying to discover, that they're always that entity. It can't be figured in thought. And the same thing with the no-self. The no-self can't be learned in a book. You'll just read about theories and create more thoughts of what no-self is. The no-self is the experience of losing the conceptual identity. And the ultimate way to do that is to give up the idea of oneself and learn directly from within, because the source, or the universe itself that we're not separate from, teaches that we are not separate from this very present moment of existence. This very present moment is the one life itself that nothing is separate from. And this can never be known, and it can never be named. Tao was the word that's assigned to it. But once again, Tao just points to the silence of what is right now.